The rain hammered against the grimy window of the bus as Caleb Finch checked his phone for the 10th time in 20 minutes. The screen displayed a single notification, a bank alert showing a balance of $47.12. That was it. That was everything he had until his next paycheck from the construction site, assuming his boss didn't lay him off like he'd threatened last week. Beside him, his son, Oliver, shifted restlessly, his small hand clutching the strap of his worn-out backpack. Oliver was 7 years old, with messy brown hair and eyes the color of autumn leaves. His jacket was 2 sizes too small, the cuffs riding up his thin wrists, but it was all Caleb could afford. The other kids at school had new sneakers and tablet computers. Oliver had a father who worked 18-hour days and still couldn't make ends meet. "Dad, are we almost there?" Oliver asked, his voice small. "Almost, buddy," Caleb said, forcing a smile. "Just a few more stops." They were heading to the reading hour at the public library. It was free, it was warm, and it kept Oliver occupied while Caleb scrolled through job listings on his phone. It wasn't much of a life, but it was the best he could give his son. Caleb was 28, though he looked older. The years of manual labor, sleepless nights, and constant worry had carved deep lines into his face. His hands were calloused, his shoulders perpetually tense. He had been a single father since Oliver was 2 years old, after his girlfriend had walked out, leaving him with a baby and a mountain of debt. She had wanted a different life, one without the constant struggle. Caleb couldn't blame her. He wanted a different life too. He just didn't know how to get it. The bus lurched to a stop, and they shuffled off into the rain. Caleb held Oliver's hand tightly, guiding him through the puddles and toward the library doors. Inside, the warmth enveloped them like a hug. Oliver's face lit up as he spotted the children's section, with its colorful rugs and shelves of picture books. "Go ahead," Caleb said, ruffling his son's hair. "I'll be right over there." He settled into a chair near the window, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through the job listings, his heart sinking with each rejection. Warehouse worker. Night shift. No benefits. Food service. Minimum wage. Security guard. Part-time. None of them paid enough to cover rent, let alone the medical bills that had been piling up since Oliver's asthma diagnosis last year. The inhaler alone cost nearly $300 a month. Caleb had been skipping meals just to afford it. His phone buzzed, startling him. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it. He'd been getting a lot of spam calls lately, but something made him answer. "Hello? Mr. Caleb Finch," a formal voice asked. "This is he. I'm calling from Finch Industries. I'm the estate executor, Mrs. Patricia Holloway. I'm afraid I have some news regarding your late grandfather, Arthur Finch." Caleb felt his heart skip. His grandfather. He hadn't thought about the man in years. Arthur Finch had been a cold, distant figure who had disowned Caleb's father when he'd married a woman the family deemed unsuitable. Caleb had only met his grandfather once, at a family funeral when he was 6 years old. The old man had looked down at him with barely concealed disdain and said nothing. Caleb's father had died when Caleb was 19, and there had been no communication with the Finch side of the family since. "I'm sorry," Caleb said slowly. "But I don't understand. My grandfather and we weren't close." "Be that as it may," Mrs. Holloway said, "you are the only living descendant. Mr. Finch's will was very specific. Upon his passing, all assets are to be transferred to his sole surviving heir. That would be you, Mr. Finch." Caleb's mouth went dry. "All assets?" "Finch Industries, along with the family estate, various investments, and a substantial trust fund. I'll need you to come to our offices as soon as possible to begin the transfer process. We can schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning, if that's convenient." Caleb couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was grasping for something solid to hold on to. "Mr. Finch? Are you still there?" Yes," he managed. "Yes, I'm here. Tomorrow morning. I'll be there." He hung up, his hands trembling. Oliver was still across the room, happily flipping through a book about dinosaurs. Caleb stared at his son, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He was a poor construction worker with $47 in his bank account, and apparently, he had just inherited a company. The next morning, Caleb stood outside the Finch Industries headquarters, trying to calm his racing heart. The building was a glass and steel monolith, rising 60 stories into the gray sky. It was the kind of building he had only ever seen from the outside, the kind of place where people like him didn't belong. He had worn his only suit, a cheap, ill-fitting thing he'd bought at a thrift store years ago for his father's funeral. It was frayed at the cuffs and too tight across the shoulders. Oliver was with a neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had agreed to watch him for a few hours. Caleb had promised to bring him back a treat. He had no idea how he would afford it, but he'd find a way. He walked through the revolving doors, his shoes squeaking on the polished marble floor. The lobby was vast and intimidating, filled with sleek furniture and stern-faced security guards. A massive logo dominated the far wall, Finch Industries, written in gold letters. An assistant was waiting for him, a young woman with a sharp bob and a professional smile. "Mr. Finch? Please, follow me. Mrs. Holloway is expecting you." They rode the elevator to the 43rd floor, where the executive offices were located. The assistant led him through a maze of hallways, past glass-walled offices where impeccably dressed people typed furiously at computers. They stopped at a door that said, "Patricia Holloway, Estate Executor." Mrs. Holloway was a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. She stood as he entered, offering a brisk handshake. "Mr. Finch. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Caleb sat down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Mrs. Holloway opened a thick folder and began explaining the details of the inheritance. The company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There was a manor in the countryside, a penthouse apartment in the city, and a trust fund that would ensure Oliver never had to worry about money for the rest of his life. Caleb listened, his head spinning. It felt like a dream. A bizarre, impossible dream. However, Mrs. Holloway said, her tone shifting to something more serious, "There are stipulations." Caleb's heart sank. Of course there were stipulations. There were always stipulations. Mr. Finch was very particular about how his legacy was to be handled. The company has been struggling for the past 5 years. Profits are down, morale is low, and the board has been pushing for a merger with a larger corporation. Mr. Finch refused, but now that he's gone, the board is likely to move forward with their plans. "What does that have to do with me?" Caleb asked. "Everything," Mrs. Holloway said. "As the majority shareholder, you have the power to stop the merger. But there's more. Mr. Finch believed that the company needed fresh leadership. He left a specific provision in his will. You have 1 year to turn the company around. If you succeed, the company is yours in full, and the trust fund is released. If you fail, the company will be sold, and you will receive only a modest inheritance." Caleb's jaw dropped. "I'm a construction worker. I don't know anything about running a company. How am I supposed to do that?" "That, Mr. Finch, is your problem," Mrs. Holloway said, not unkindly. "But I do have some good news. Mr. Finch also appointed you as CEO, effective immediately. You will have full authority over the company's operations. You'll also have access to the company's resources, including its executive team. If you can earn their trust and their cooperation, you might just have a chance." Earn their trust. That sounded about as likely as winning the lottery. Caleb had spent his entire life being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. He was the poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks. He was the single father who couldn't afford proper shoes for his son. And now he was supposed to walk into a boardroom filled with millionaires and convince them that he knew what he was doing? "One more thing," Mrs. Holloway said. "There's a woman named Adelaide Sterling. She's the CEO of Sterling Global, our biggest rival. She's been trying to acquire Finch Industries for years. Her father started the feud between the two families, and Adelaide has continued it with a vengeance. She's brilliant, ruthless, and she'll stop at nothing to see this company fall into her hands. Be very careful around her, Mr. Finch. She's not someone you want as an enemy." Adelaide Sterling. The name was familiar, even to someone like Caleb. She was a legend in the business world, a woman who had built an empire from nothing. The papers called her the Silver Fox, because of her platinum blonde hair and her cunning. She was 35, single, and incredibly wealthy. She was also, according to every article ever written about her, completely and utterly cold-hearted. Great. Just what Caleb needed. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and endless questions. Caleb felt like he was drowning. He didn't understand the financial reports, the projections, or the jargon that the executives tossed around like confetti. Everywhere he looked, he saw skeptical faces, whispered conversations, and barely concealed contempt. The board was hostile. The employees were suspicious. The media was having a field day, painting him as an unqualified, uneducated bumpkin who had stumbled into a fortune. But Caleb didn't give up. He couldn't afford to. He had Oliver to think about. And somewhere, deep down, he had something to prove, to himself, to his grandfather, and to the world that had always told him he wasn't enough. He started small. He visited the factory floor, talking to the workers, learning their names, listening to their complaints. He brought coffee to the early shifts and stayed late to help clean up. He sat in on meetings, taking notes furiously, asking questions even when they made him look foolish. He spent his nights studying business books, his glasses slipping down his nose as he read by the dim light of his apartment. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The workers started to trust him. They saw that he wasn't just some out-of-touch rich guy. He was one of them. He understood their struggles because he had lived them. The executives, while still skeptical, started to grudgingly admire his determination. He wasn't stupid. He was just uneducated. And he was learning fast. Then, 3 months into his tenure, Caleb made a decision that would change everything. Finch Industries had a subsidiary that produced affordable housing materials. A division that had been neglected for years because it wasn't profitable enough. The board wanted to shut it down, sell off the assets, and use the money to prop up their more lucrative ventures. Caleb refused. He had seen what affordable housing could mean for families like his. He had lived in cramped apartments, worried about eviction, prayed that the roof wouldn't collapse. He knew that affordable housing wasn't just a business venture. It was a lifeline. "The construction division is our soul," he told the board, his voice shaking but determined. "It's what my grandfather built this company on. We can't just abandon it because it's not making enough money. We need to find a way to make it work." The board was furious. The CEO of the subsidiary, a slick man named Harrison Vance, stormed out of the meeting. But Caleb held his ground. He cut costs, renegotiated contracts, and found new markets. He even rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside the construction crews, his calloused hands proving more useful than any of the executive spreadsheets. And then, something miraculous happened. The housing division started turning a profit. It wasn't huge, but it was enough. The board stopped grumbling. The employees started smiling. And Caleb Finch, the poor single dad who had inherited a company, began to look less like a joke and more like a leader. Meanwhile, Adelaide Sterling watched from the sidelines. She had been monitoring Caleb's progress with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. When she had first heard that Arthur Finch had left his company to some random construction worker, she had laughed. She had assumed it would be a disaster, a perfect opportunity for her to swoop in and seize the company for pennies on the dollar. But Caleb had surprised her. He had defied every expectation. He had turned a failing company around, not with slick business tactics, but with hard work and genuine care. Adelaide didn't like being surprised. She didn't like feeling anything at all, really. She had built her walls high and thick, brick by brick, over a lifetime of disappointment and betrayal. Her father had abandoned her mother when Adelaide was a child, leaving them with nothing but debt and shame. Her mother had remarried a cruel man who had made Adelaide's life a living hell. She had clawed her way out of that darkness, using her intelligence and ruthlessness as weapons. She had sworn she would never be vulnerable again. She would never need anyone. She would never love anyone. But there was something about Caleb Finch that made her walls feel less secure. He was kind. He was honest. He was the kind of man who gave his last dollar to a stranger without a second thought. She had seen him on the news, standing in front of the company's factory, shaking hands with workers. She had seen the way he smiled, not the practiced smile of a politician, but a real smile, full of warmth and sincerity. She had seen him holding his son's hand, walking through the park, his face relaxed and happy. Adelaide had never had that. She had never had anyone who looked at her like that. She tried to push the feelings away. She told herself she was just studying her enemy, looking for weaknesses. She scheduled a meeting with Caleb, ostensibly to discuss a potential business partnership. It was a lie. She didn't know what she wanted. She just knew she had to see him again. They met in a neutral location, a quiet cafe in the heart of the city. Adelaide arrived first, dressed in a crisp black suit that cost more than Caleb made in a year. Her platinum hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine. Caleb arrived a few minutes later, looking nervous and out of place. He was wearing the same thrift store suit, but there was something different about him. He held himself with more confidence, his shoulders straighter, his head held high. He looked her in the eyes when he shook her hand, and his grip was firm. "Mrs. Sterling," he said. "Thank you for meeting me." "Miss," she corrected, not unkindly. "I'm not married." "Sorry." "Miss Sterling." They sat down. The conversation started awkwardly, two strangers circling each other like wary animals. But as they talked, something shifted. Adelaide found herself opening up in ways she hadn't intended. She told him about her childhood, about her absent father, about her mother's abusive husband. She told him about the loneliness of her success, the endless nights in her empty penthouse, the numbness that had settled over her heart. And Caleb listened. He didn't judge her. He didn't pity her. He just listened, his kind eyes full of understanding. "Everyone's carrying something," he said softly. "We all have wounds that don't heal. It's what we do with them that matters." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away furiously. She never cried. She hadn't cried since she was a child, locked in her room, listening to her stepfather's angry shouts. But here, in this quiet cafe, with this impossible man, she felt something crack inside her. "What do you want, Caleb?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you really want?" He thought about it for a long moment. "I want to make a difference," he said finally. "I want to build something that matters. I want Oliver to grow up in a world where he doesn't have to struggle the way I did. And I want..." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I want to stop being so alone." Adelaide felt her heart lurch. She knew that feeling. She lived with it every day. The friendship that blossomed between them was unexpected and fragile. They started meeting regularly, at first for business, and then for something more. Adelaide found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way Caleb made her laugh, to the way he made her feel seen. She found herself thinking about him constantly, about the way he tucked Oliver in at night, about the way he sang off-key in the shower, about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. And then, one night, everything changed. It was Oliver's birthday. Caleb had organized a small party at the community center. Nothing fancy, just some balloons and cake and a few of Oliver's friends. Adelaide had been invited, and she had agonized for hours over what to wear. She had finally settled on a simple dress, something softer than her usual armor. When she arrived, Oliver ran up to her, his face lit up with excitement. "Aunt Adele," he shouted, using the nickname he had given her. "You came." Adelaide knelt down and hugged him, something she had never imagined herself doing. He was so small, so warm, so full of life. He smelled like sugar and soap and childhood. She felt her heart swell with a love so fierce it scared her. Caleb came up behind them, watching the scene with a soft smile. "He's been talking about you all day," he said. "You're his favorite person." "I'm honored," Adelaide said, standing up. She felt awkward, exposed, but she didn't want to run away. The party was a blur of laughter and chaos. Caleb was in his element, joking with the kids, helping them with their games. Adelaide sat on the sidelines, watching him. He was so natural, so unafraid. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being himself. As the party wound down, Caleb sat down beside her. His shoulder brushed against hers, and she felt a jolt of electricity. "Thank you for coming," he said. "It means a lot to Oliver. And to me." "I wouldn't have missed it," Adelaide said, her voice soft. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb turned to her, his eyes full of something she couldn't name. "Adelaide," he said. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. Adelaide felt her heart stop. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid of the feelings that had been building inside her. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to push him away. Instead, she looked into his eyes, and she saw everything she had ever wanted. Love. Acceptance. Belonging. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But together, maybe they could be something more. "Will you stay tonight?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not for. I mean, just to talk. I don't want to be alone." Caleb smiled. "I'll stay as long as you want me to." That night, they talked until the sun came up. They talked about their fears, their dreams, their pasts. Adelaide told him about the moment she realized her stepfather would never love her. Caleb told him about the night he held Oliver in his arms for the first time, terrified and overwhelmed, but determined to be a better father than his own had been. They talked about the future, about what they wanted for themselves, for Oliver, for the world. And when the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Adelaide realized something. She was in love with Caleb Finch. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Adelaide's life. She spent more time with Caleb and Oliver, becoming a regular fixture in their lives. She helped Oliver with his homework, taught him how to bake cookies, and read him bedtime stories. She felt like a part of the family, like she finally belonged. But the past had a way of catching up with her. Harrison Vance, the subsidiary CEO that Caleb had clashed with, had been scheming behind the scenes. He had been in league with Adelaide's board, feeding them information, trying to undermine Caleb's leadership. And then, he had discovered something that could destroy everything. Adelaide's past. The tabloids had a field day. They unearthed stories about her mother, about her abusive stepfather, about the bankruptcy that had nearly destroyed her family. They painted her as a fraud, a poor girl who had clawed her way to the top by any means necessary. They made her sound like a monster. And then, Harrison Vance leaked a document that seemed to prove Adelaide had been conspiring to acquire Finch Industries all along. Caleb confronted her in his office. His face was pale, his eyes full of hurt. "Adelaide," he said, his voice strained. "Is this true? Were you just using me all along?" "No," Adelaide cried. "Caleb, you have to believe me. I never had anything to do with this. Harrison Vance forged those documents. He's trying to destroy us." "Why should I believe you?" Caleb asked. "You have to understand how this looks. You're my rival. You're the one who's been trying to take my company for years. And now these documents surface." Adelaide felt her heart shatter. She had never been more honest with anyone in her life, and he didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes, the doubt, the suspicion. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you, Caleb. I love Oliver. I would never do anything to hurt you. Please, you have to believe me." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he took a deep breath. "I do believe you," he said finally. I'm scared. I've been hurt before. I don't want to lose you, Adelaide. I don't want to lose any of this." Adelaide walked over to him, taking his hands in hers. "You're not going to lose me," she said. "I promise. We'll get through this together." Caleb pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you so much it terrifies me." The resolution came in the form of a disgruntled employee at Harrison Vance's office, who came forward with evidence of the forgery. Vance was arrested, and the charges against Adelaide were dropped. The board was shamed into silence, and Caleb's position was secure. More importantly, Caleb and Adelaide had weathered the storm together. Their bond was stronger than ever. A year after Caleb inherited the company, he stood in front of the board and delivered his final report. The company was thriving. The housing division was a success. Profits were up. Morale was high. And Caleb Finch, the poor construction worker who had stumbled into a fortune, was a legitimate success story. "Thank you for giving me a chance," he said, addressing the board. "I know I didn't look like much when I first walked through those doors. But I hope I've proved that you don't need a fancy degree or a rich family to be a leader. You just need to care." The board applauded. Even the most skeptical members had been won over. That evening, Caleb took Adelaide to the rooftop of the company headquarters. The city stretched out below them, a glittering tapestry of lights. "We did it," Adelaide said, looking out at the view. "You did it." "We did it," Caleb corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." He turned to her, his eyes shining. "Adelaide Sterling, I've loved you since the moment I met you. You're brilliant, and you're beautiful, and you're the strongest person I know. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple ring, nothing like the elaborate jewels Adelaide was used to. But she had never seen anything more perfect. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Caleb. 1,000 times yes." Oliver came running out onto the rooftop, his face split in a wide grin. "Aunt Adele. Are you going to be my mommy now?" Adelaide laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I'm going to be your mommy," she said. "If that's okay with you." Oliver nodded eagerly. "It's more than okay. It's the best thing ever." The wedding was a small affair, held in the community center where they had first hosted Oliver's party. Adelaide wore a simple white dress, and Caleb wore the same thrift store suit, which had become something of a good luck charm. Oliver was the ring bearer, and he took his job very seriously. As they exchanged their vows, Adelaide looked into Caleb's eyes and spoke from her heart. "I spent my whole life building walls," she said. "I thought if I didn't let anyone in, I couldn't get hurt. But I was wrong. The walls weren't protecting me. They were keeping me from the one thing I really needed. Love. And then you came along, and you tore down every single one of them. You showed me that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to need someone. You taught me how to love, Caleb. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life loving you back." Caleb's eyes were misty. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said. "I was just a poor single dad with nothing to offer. But you looked at me like I was a king. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. You made me believe that I could be more. Thank you for that, Adelaide. Thank you for seeing me." The years that followed were full of joy. Oliver thrived under the love and attention of two devoted parents. Adelaide learned to let her guard down, to trust, to laugh. Caleb built the housing empire he had always dreamed of, providing affordable homes to families who needed them most. And together, they built a life that was richer than either of them could have imagined. Adelaide Sterling, the woman who had been called the Silver Fox, the ruthless CEO who had never let anyone close, found her happiness in the most unlikely place. She found it in the arms of a poor single dad and his little boy. She found it in the laughter that filled their home, in the warmth of their love, in the simple joys of a life well lived. She learned that true success isn't measured in money or power. It's measured in the people you love and the lives you touch. And she had touched the lives of two people, her husband and her son, just as they had touched hers. Adelaide Sterling Finch finally understood what her heart had been trying to tell her all along. She had always been worthy of love. She had just been waiting for the right person to show her. And Caleb Finch had been the one to open her eyes. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Adelaide stood on the balcony of her new home, not a penthouse, but a modest house with a garden, a swing set, and a dog named Finnegan. She watched Caleb push Oliver on the swing, their laughter drifting up to her like music. She smiled, a real smile, full of warmth and joy. This was her family. This was her life. This was everything she had ever wanted, and she had finally found it. Adelaide Sterling Finch was no longer the cold-hearted CEO who had built walls around her heart. She was a wife, a mother, and the happiest woman in the world. She had finally learned that the greatest risk in life was never taking one at all. And she had taken the biggest risk of all, she had opened her heart to love. And it had paid off in ways she could never have imagined. She was Adelaide Sterling Finch, and she was finally, completely, undeniably whole.